This wasn't a firefight waiting to happen. It was a calculation made before we ever arrived. The morning of June 14th, 1969 began heavy with humidity along the southwestern jungle edge of Quảng Trị. Moisture clung to every leaf, every blade of grass. I checked my watch. 6:47 hours. The sun hadn't fully climbed above the canopy, but the heat had already settled in. My name is Captain Michael R. Harris, commanding a U.S. spade infantry company of 118 men. On the map, this area was nothing more than a green grid square. On the ground, it was a maze of roots, thick brush, and invisible threats that could kill without warning. We weren't operating blind. Behind our formation, two M60 machine guns provided mobile firepower. A 60mm mortar team followed close enough to respond within minutes. Farther back, artillery units at the base stood by, pre-registered and waiting for coordinates. On paper, we had the advantage, like the trail appeared near the jungle edge, flattened leaves, snapped branches, footprints pressed deep into damp soil. The signs were obvious, almost generous, too generous. Any junior officer would have called it a retreat path. Enemy forces pulling back in a hurry. But I had been in Vietnam long enough to recognize a pattern. When a trail wants to be seen, it's no longer a mistake, it's a message. I ordered the formation to spread out. Scouts moved 10 meters ahead, rifles low but ready. I stayed near the center where my PRC-25 radio could reach both the point and the rear. That position came with responsibility. Any bad decision made there would ripple through the entire company. We stepped deeper into the jungle. No gunfire, no snipers, no tripwires or grenade traps. The silence didn't feel like safety. It felt like a room waiting to be entered. After roughly 800 meters, I ordered a halt. The engineers swept the ground quickly, no metallic signatures. That didn't calm me, it confirmed my suspicion. In this region, the enemy rarely relied on standard mines. They preferred homemade explosives, artillery shells, scavenged bombs, pressure-triggered devices built from whatever was available. No metal, no warning, just weight and timing. I was about to issue an order to shift direction when the explosion came. Not from the front, not from the scouts. From inside the formation, a sharp, compact blast tore through the earth. Dirt and debris erupted upward. One private was thrown sideways into a tree, his scream swallowed by the shockwave. That was when understanding hit me. This wasn't a standard anti-personnel mine. It was a shallow, buried, pressure-activated homemade device. Simple, cheap, and perfectly placed. And it wasn't alone. The trail wasn't guiding us toward the enemy. It was guiding us through the minefield, step by step, aligned perfectly with a standard American infantry formation. They didn't need to fire a single shot. They didn't need to reveal themselves. All they needed was for us to keep moving. I dropped to the ground, gripping my M16, heart pounding louder than the jungle itself. This wasn't an ambush waiting to happen. It was a calculation designed long before we ever arrived. Our 118-man company, our discipline, our spacing, everything we were trained to do had been factored into the trap. The enemy didn't chase us. They led us, and we followed. The first explosion didn't just wound a man. It froze the company in place. Training took over. Every soldier dropped instinctively, prone, rifles forward, eyes searching for a threat that wasn't there. No muzzle flashes, no incoming fire, just smoke rising through the trees. That was when it became clear to me the minefield wasn't meant to kill us all at once. It was designed to stop us from moving. A stationary American unit was a predictable unit. I grabbed the PRC-25 radio and whispered for silence. No one fired, no one advanced. The jungle remained calm, almost patient. I studied the ground in front of us. The trail curved gently left, just enough to force soldiers to follow it single file. That wasn't coincidence, it was geometry. Homemade mines don't rely on blast radius alone. They rely on human behavior. The enemy knew exactly how far apart we spaced our men. They knew how a U.S. infantry company reacted after a blast. They knew we would halt, compress inward, seek cover along the trail, which meant the next mines weren't ahead of us. They were beside us. People ask why we didn't just retreat. The answer is simple. Retreating required movement, and movement was exactly what the enemy wanted. Behind us lay the same trail, now compromised, uncharted, and likely mined a second time. Ahead of us was uncertainty. Staying still invited mortar fire or a follow-up ambush. This wasn't a trap with a door. It was a box. The enemy had turned our numbers, 118 men, into a liability. Every step risked another detonation. Every delay increased casualties. I called for the 60mm mortar team to hold position and prepared artillery coordinates, just in case. But calling fire blindly in jungle, this dense, risked killing our own men. The enemy had solved that equation before we ever entered the forest. The mines themselves were crude. What made them effective was timing. They didn't explode under the point man. They detonated where command and control lived, the center. That told me everything. This wasn't harassment. This was deliberate command disruption. The enemy wasn't trying to wipe us out. They were trying to separate leadership from momentum, forcing hesitation, fear, and error. They were turning doctrine against us. At 12-3 hours, I made a decision, no manual covered. We would not advance down the trail. We would not retreat along it either. We would break formation and move off the geometry, slowly, manually clearing ground that had never been meant to be walked on. That was exactly what the enemy hadn't planned for. It would cost time, it would cost sweat, and it might still cost lives. But it gave us one thing the minefield was designed to steal: choice. Breaking off the trail didn't bring relief, it brought attention. The jungle didn't erupt in gunfire the way new officers imagined combat. There were no wild volleys, no shouted commands. Instead, the forest tightened, quiet, focused, deliberate. That was when I realized something critical. The minefield was never the final weapon. It was the signal. By stepping off the trail, we told them exactly where we were. The shot came from the right flank. Not loud, not dramatic, just a single crack, controlled, distant, precise. One of my men collapsed without a sound, helmet rolling into the undergrowth. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't random fire. This was a sniper team, positioned to exploit the chaos created by the minefield. They weren't aiming for mass casualties. They were aiming for command paralysis. A sniper in jungle terrain doesn't need distance. He needs angles. The minefield forced us to break formation. The broken formation exposed gaps. The gaps created predictable pauses, moments when men stopped, knelt, or turned their heads. That's where the sniper lived. I didn't see him. I saw the effect of his patience. Every second we hesitated, the jungle became smaller. I knew what the manual said: suppress, maneuver, flank. But suppression requires visible targets, and the enemy wasn't offering any. So I changed the equation. I ordered one M60 team to fire, not at the sniper, but into empty jungle, deliberately offset from our position. Loud, prolonged, wasteful by doctrine standards, and that was the point. The sniper fired again. That single shot gave me something priceless: direction. They didn't disengage. Instead, the fire shifted. Faster now, closer. The sniper wasn't alone. He never was. A second position opened up, overlapping fields of fire, pushing us inward. That confirmed my final fear. This wasn't a defensive action. This was a layered kill zone. Mines to stop us, snipers to shape us, jungle to contain us, and we were right in the center of it. Pinned down, fragmented, and bleeding time. Every minute we stayed still increased the enemy's advantage. The snipers had overlapping angles now. Not enough to wipe us out, but enough to keep heads down, to force hesitation, to slow command flow. That was their real objective. I checked my watch, 12:41 hours. If we waited longer, they wouldn't need bullets. Heat, shock, and confusion would do the rest. I knew what came next would be questioned later, if we lived long enough to explain it. Calling artillery into dense jungle is a gamble. Calling it this close is desperation. But artillery doesn't need to kill the enemy, it needs to change the battlefield. I radioed the fire direction center and gave them a grid: danger close. The words hung in the air longer than the transmission itself. They asked for confirmation. I confirmed. The plan wasn't to hit snipers directly. It was to tear the jungle apart, strip concealment, collapse firing lanes, force movement. If the enemy had planned every step, then fire would erase their math. The first artillery round didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like the ground tearing open. Tree trunks snapped. Leaves vanished. The jungle, so patient, so controlled, suddenly screamed. Secondary explosions followed. Not ours. The minefield was cooking off. That told me something vital. The enemy had layered explosives deeper than we thought. Their own trap was being torn apart by forces they couldn't control. For the first time since entering the forest, they lost tempo. Chaos is only useful if you move inside it. I signaled the squads forward, not fast, not aggressive, methodical. The M60 teams shifted fire to seal off likely withdrawal routes. The mortar team stood by but held fire. Visibility was too unstable. We weren't chasing them. We were escaping their geometry. The snipers stopped firing. Either they were pulling back or they were dead. In jungle like this, you never get confirmation. Only silence. By 13:26 hours, the firing had stopped. We regrouped in a torn clearing that hadn't existed an hour earlier. We counted heads. We treated wounds. We didn't celebrate. Firepower had saved us, but it had also reshaped the battlefield in ways we couldn't fully see. The enemy had slipped away, leaving behind fragments of a plan that almost worked perfectly. Almost. When the jungle finally went quiet, it wasn't peace. It was accounting. We formed a loose perimeter around the shattered clearing. Medics moved carefully, every step deliberate, every knee lowered with suspicion. You don't relax after a minefield. You survive it, and then you wait to see what follows. Out of 118 men, we had lost 7. Another 14 were wounded, mostly from shrapnel, shock, and secondary blasts. By American standards, it wasn't a massacre. By the enemy's standards, it was a successful operation. Later, much later, I replayed the engagement in my head. The mines hadn't been placed to kill the lead element. They were placed to strike command depth. The trail wasn't random. It followed the average stride length of a loaded infantryman. The spacing matched U.S. doctrine, not chance. They didn't guess how we would move. They knew. What looked like crude explosives was actually precision psychology, forcing us to stop, to cluster, to hesitate, and to bleed time. The minefield wasn't the weapon we were. We had artillery, we had machine guns, we had air support on call, and none of it mattered until we were willing to destroy the ground itself. The enemy had accepted something we hadn't. They didn't need to win the fight. They only needed to shape it, then walk away. Their mines cost almost nothing. Our response burned artillery shells measured in thousands of dollars. That imbalance wasn't accidental. It was doctrine, just not ours. Back at base, reports were written, grids were marked, lessons were learned. But the real lesson didn't fit on paper. The enemy never intended to hold ground. They never intended to destroy us outright. They intended to control our decisions, where we moved, when we stopped, how we reacted. That day, a handful of men with homemade explosives dictated the behavior of an American infantry company backed by artillery. That wasn't luck. That was understanding. Years later, people would ask about firefights, about kill counts, about victories. I remembered a trail that shouldn't have existed. I remembered how easily we followed it, and I understood something that still unsettles me.